Yes, so we want to begin this remarkable session acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We have a remarkable session this evening from one of our beloved elders who's been on the front lines of this work for a very long time, our elder Anan Lololi. He's been working on food sovereignty and food justice for 44 years. Anan is one of the founders of the African Food Basket, AFB, an organization founded in 1995. He has been the executive director of AFB for 26 years. He also leads many remarkable initiatives across Turtle Island and internationally to bring liberation, sovereignty to our people through the model of food. So we give thanks once again, Elder, for your leadership. I'm going to hand it off to you. Merasi pa.
Give thanks, my brother Victor. I'd like to give thanks to the Almighty for giving the strength and the health to be here this evening. I'd like to give thanks to my ancestors, to whose shoulder I stand on. I'd like to give thanks to all the folks who at SETC, who this conversation tonight, all my brothers and sisters in Black Food Sovereignty Working Group and the African Food Basket for allowing me this opportunity to present on Black food sovereignty in Canada. I really give thanks to my brother Victor for creating this space so that we could really speak to our issues that is of critical importance to the development of people of African descent in Canada. I give thanks. So I like to say Black food sovereignty in Canada. I like to say I spread the gospel of Black food sovereignty in Canada. And when I say gospel now, I don't want people getting off on religion and so forth, because the gospel is also good news. Come to bring good news to our people. Black food sovereignty is critical to the development of people of African descent in Canada. It's a concept that is now recently circulating in North America. And a lot of folks are now tuning in to the idea of food sovereignty as different to food security. And I can get into that a little bit more as the presentation moves forward, but it's definitely a difference. So we'll start with a bit of historical perspective. I am originally from the north coast of the Amazon in a country called Guyana. I migrated to Canada in the late 70s. I was so honored. As soon as I reached Canada, I was able to get my lessons and my knowledge of what I need to do in Canada through a community center in Regent Park called IMICAN. Basically, it stands for Immigrant Canadians. And folks in Toronto would know Regent Park is one of the first public housing schemes, our community in Canada. And in that time, there were a lot of Black folks who live in Regent Park. But IMICAN is an institution that really schooled me to know myself and know my place and what is my duty living in Canada as a person of African descent. I got hooked up with a band called Truths and Rights, who was another great experience for me that I cannot thank the members enough for what they did for my life in getting me conscious and giving me an understanding of how to work together. That definitely influenced my work in Black food sovereignty and in the African Food Basket. But one thing I would say about this band, it had a motto. And to this day, it is my motto of how I move forward and the things I do. I've always been working as a community worker. I was working for community. And the motto was create to relate to the struggles of our people. Because we as people of African descent are in a continual struggle. Continuous struggle fighting anti-Black racism. So let's go on this journey, the gospel of Black food sovereignty. And I thank everyone who's on this call today to share with this knowledge, and I'm willing to learn. You could put any questions in the chat so that we could have a conversation. This is not a talk shop, but this is a workshop, because we're working tonight. I'm working with you, and you're working with I. Give thanks. Black food sovereignty in Canada. So I can do a little bit of African food basket. For the last 27 years, we've been around in Toronto, the first people of color, they say a food group, food organization, food sovereignty institution, community food security institution in Canada. And we started in 1995. So what I'm doing now, we're going back and get it. We're going back and fetch that experience. That's why you see the Sankofa symbol right now. So we started October 1995, and basically the institution and the focus was a community food buying club, like a food cooperative, non-profit cooperative food buying club. And to this day, we are still practicing this concept of a non-profit food buying club. I can get to that more as we go through. So the idea was to, because the cost of food for people of African descent, especially folks from the Caribbean and folks from the continent, we as people of African descent, we consume the most expensive foods. And it's proven when you go into the supermarket, we consume sweet potatoes. And I'm not talking about the local North American sweet potatoes. I'm talking about the real deal of sweet potatoes, yam, eddos, cocoyam, cassava, mangoes, avocados, long beans, bitter melon, and the list goes on. Those particular items are very expensive. And those are the items that we consume. So, as you know, in Canada, the unemployment rate and so forth, people of African descent, we live a lot in low-income communities. And the fact that that is true, because when you want to see large populations of people of African descent, you got to go to community housing, Toronto community housing areas. You can see our large populations. So basically, we wanted to see a way that we could make food more affordable for people of African descent. So we started the African Food Basket, and we started delivering this food in boxes. Small one costs $15, a large one costs $25. Now, if you go and you buy that particular box of food retail, it costs between $35 and $40. The reason why the cost was so low, we buy in bulk, and we had lots of volunteers. Volunteers to help purchase, volunteers to pack, volunteers to distribute, and volunteers to make calls and coordinate the distribution. So that created the environment where we could purchase food in bulk and make sure, especially the single mothers and the seniors, would have access to this food once a month. Now, we've been doing it several times a month. Within COVID, we were doing it every week. And there's another story, over 1 million pounds of food that we distribute within the last couple of years since COVID. So this is what it looked like. Every third week in the month, the volunteers pack the basket, and over 500 people eat food from the baskets each month. And we did that for 11 years. So we started from 1995 to around 2006, 2007. In between 1995 and 2007, we also embarked on many different types of food programs. We started as a food buying club, but what we realized after the first year, there was a conference at the former Ryerson University, that is now Toronto Metropolitan University, and it was a food conference. And as a food buying club, the only Black institution looking at food in Canada, we decided to come to the conference. It was a conference on community food security. And there we realized that there's much more that could be done in programming the African food basket. And one of the areas that we were really drawn to was urban agriculture. We're talking about community garden animation, backyard garden animation. We're talking about gardens in parks, gardens in churches, and we also will talk a bit about urban farming. We also got involved in looking at advocacy and policy because, as I said, our knowledge started to expand when we're looking at these community food security programs. As you could see on your screen, it's a food guide. Generally, the one on the left, the original food guide, the healthy eating, I was around in 1995 and a couple of years after. Now, if you look at the foods on that food guide, it's not the food that people of African descent consume. Folks like to call it, as you see in the yellow with the yellow background, that's a white bread food guide. It's not culturally specific. But after a few years, I think about after 5 or 6 years, the government of Canada adopted a new food guide, and they call it one that's more culturally specific. And that's the two in the middle, the one in Spanish and the one in Hindi. So, and I use the one on the right as a food guide of Guyana. When I came down in the 90s, in 2000, I got this from some colleagues down here, and it shows you what the food guide would look like in the Caribbean. And I would say to some extent in Africa and Latin America and South America. So you could see the difference. But as recently, the government has changed the food guide. One good thing I could say about it is that it's much more plant-based. I think it's about 75 to 80% plant-based presently. So over the years, we lobbied the government about making sure the food guide is more reflective of diversity and people of color, especially people of African descent. Community food animation, as I spoke about earlier, this is an area that we realize we need to get involved in, because if people in our community don't have money to buy the food, the other alternative is to do the best thing they could do, grow their own food. So we started what we call community food animation. We first started in establishing community gardens, and then we went to backyard gardens, and then we also got involved in urban farming. We managed 2 urban farms, one at Jane and Steeles, and one in McVean, in Brampton, at a farm called McVean Farm. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we move forward. We also got involved in school gardens. We had a garden for the new Afrocentric alternative school garden at Dunsview, where we engaged with some teachers and some of the students. So you can see in the upper right of this screen, some of the students in the garden. And these are several other community gardens across Toronto that we got involved in. We got involved in a lot of food programs, especially in the community of Lawrence Heights and in Rexdale also. So sorry about that. One of the other areas that we really champion from very early is engaging youths. We originally had a program called the Afuya Youth Program that started in 1997. And the idea was to engage our youths to look at leadership. Because at that time, gang violence and youth crimes in our low-income communities was rampant. And we realized we need to make sure we get involved in some way. So we got involved and we started at the Afuya Community Garden Program. And then we changed the name to Cultivating Youth Leadership, where we start engaging young people to learn particular skills of leadership, learn about food, and learn about health and nutrition, and also to learn about Black history, how to be African-centered. And that was a very, very important aspect of this project. And from 1997 until present day, the African Food Basket is still running the Cultivating Youth Leadership Program. We believe that engaged youth are a key asset in building positive communities and that all youths possess natural leadership potential. I like to say we have a lot of black diamonds in our community. All you need is a little bit shining up, and we, over the period of time, I would say probably over 500 youths, from we start, we get a chance to engage with them very, very close over a number of years. And so we see those diamonds as they shone. So youth leadership development is a part of a long-term strategy for promoting well-being and preventing community problems by helping youth discover that their skills, motivation, and opportunities make lasting contribution to their communities. And that's a fact. I got a lot of stories I could tell you, but I'm sure we guys want to make sure that we engage youth people, young people. So there's some posters, some pictures of the youth in action. And this particular one, as you can see down here, the youths are dressed in green tops as a group. This is in Detroit, at the Detroit D-Town Farm. And my good friend Malika Kinney on the right is the executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We ensure that the young people not only work in Toronto, but they work in the countrysides in Ontario. They get a chance to go to Detroit. They get a chance to go to Philadelphia. They get a chance to go to New York. Because we want to make sure we broaden their horizon of knowing and engaging with other youths in other communities, especially youths of African descent. So another part of the program that we got involved with is what we call incubator farms. This is the Ujamaa farm. Actually, the young people, we started the Ujamaa farm to engage the young people. And then we started looking at other programs that are going to engage our community. We were able to engage adults on what we call the incubator farm program. So we engage older folks to learn to farm, ones who wanted to become a career or a lifestyle. We train them in urban farming. We at the incubator farm, we had tools available. We had irrigation, we had land, and we had, most importantly, we had education program, learning folks how to farm in Ontario. Another critical area of work that we got involved is what we call food justice. In 2006, we had a race food security forum inside the community, where we brought together nonprofit organizations involved in food, Black community organizations, City of Toronto staff, Toronto community housing staff, and some Black leaders in our community to discuss the state of race and food security in our community. This was the beginning of what we call our food justice journey. We got involved in food justice by being a part of the Community Food Security Coalition of North America very early, and we were part of a group, a committee called the Community Outreach and Diversity Group. That really, I learned a lot from the experience in the African Food Basket, gained a lot of knowledge from being involved in this group. Eventually, we grew out of the coalition and we started Growing Food and Justice for All initiative. This is the premier and probably the historic group that started the food justice movement in North America. The Growing Food and Justice for All initiative is a new comprehensive network that dismantling racism as a core principle that brings together social change agents from diverse sectors working to bring about new, healthy, and sustainable food systems and supporting and building multicultural leadership in impoverished communities throughout the world. Our focus was North America. I'm talking about Canada, and I'm talking about the USA. This group really creates a new way how we look at food and how we engage with food security organizations, which predominantly were white institutions. People of color were hardly involved in it at that time, from 2000 to around 2010. Right now, it's a very changed movement. There are many different strands of food movements now, other than just one food movement. My focus to this conversation is on the Black food movement. That's why we're talking about Black food sovereignty. So I'm getting into the key area of our conversation, cultivating Black food sovereignty in Toronto and by extension, Canada. I like to quote this quote from our prophet, our leader, this great Black man from Jamaica. His name is Marcus Messiah Garvey. If you don't know him, get to know him. Marcus Messiah Garvey. His writings and his teaching has been able to influence most Black leaders from the early 2000s, early 1900s to present. And this is what you have to say. I put up this quote because it speaks to sovereignty. If you have no confidence in self, you're twice defeated in the race of life. We need confidence because when we talk about sovereignty, we talk about defining our future in every way. We're talking about Black sovereignty in general. But this conversation is about Black food sovereignty. Food sovereignty, the right of peoples, communities, and countries to define their own agricultural, labor, fishing, food, and land policies, which are ecologically, socially, economically, and culturally appropriate to their unique circumstances. The right for people and communities and countries to define. I could say we as African people, African descent in Canada, the Canadian government has done what they need to do, but it's not good enough for us as people of African descent. Over 28% of people of African descent are food insecure in Canada, and over 36.6% of Black children are food insecure in Canada. What I'm really saying is that there are a lot of Black children who wake up in the morning and don't have a proper breakfast, who go to bed at night without a proper dinner. I'm not talking about fast food. I'm not talking about garbage food. I'm talking about healthy food for their breakfast and healthy food for the lunch and healthy food for the dinner. So we have a third of our population. And you know the problems of not having healthy food or proper food. There's mental health. There's many health issues to do with folks who are food insecure. So food sovereignty also includes a right to food. Food is a human right, okay? Like any other right, food is a human right that should be adhered to. It includes the true right to food and to produce food. We don't want to be given food. We want to make sure we produce our own food. That is defining food sovereignty, where we define what we need rather than folks giving to us. Which means that all people have the right to safe, nutritious, and very important culturally appropriate foods. You know, if you're a person who grew up on rock and roll or classical music, European classical music, and you come from a place like Jamaica, or you come from a place like Brazil, or you come from even in the United States, you would know that that music is not your music. And like food, like music, we need food that is culturally appropriate. Like we need music that's culturally appropriate. We need food that's culturally appropriate. And so nutrition and culturally appropriate food and food producing resources and the ability to sustain themselves and their society. Basically, what it's saying is that we need to define our food system or sustainable food system, but also we need the resources to do this. Now, when I say we need the resources, it's resources that everyone who is involved in food production in Canada get. So we're not asking for no special privileges. I'm going to talk about the originators of La Via Campesina, of food sovereignty. There's a group called La Via Campesina. The Via Campesina means the peasant way. And this peasant group, putting forward the peasant way, has started the most important food systems revolution in the world from 1993. And this organization of international farmers was founded in 1993 in Mons, Belgium, with headquarters in Zimbabwe presently, and formed by 182 organizations in 81 countries around the world, and describes itself as an international movement which coordinates peasants' organization of small and middle-scale producers, agricultural workers, rural women, and indigenous communities from Asia, Africa, America, and Europe. And this movement is growing from strength to strength. But what we will be talking about is the Black food sovereignty movement in Canada. The VA campaign introduced the right of food sovereignty at the World Food Summit in 1996 as the right of people to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through sustainable methods and their right to define their own food and agricultural system. I really love the last part of this statement, of this paragraph, and it says the right to define. We're talking about our human right, the right to food, of defining our own system. As I said before, if the government had known what they need to do, we wouldn't need to define our own food system. But right now we're working with the government so we could collectively define our own food system in Canada. The phrase culturally appropriate signifies that the food that is available and accessible for the population should fit with the cultural backgrounds of the people consuming it. For example, subsidized and imported wheat products will not fall under this category in any country where corn-based foods were the basis of traditional meals. We're talking about places like Mexico, we're talking about some countries in Latin America, many countries in Africa. So, food sovereignty versus food security. This is a question that always comes up. I want to make sure I get it out of the way. Food sovereignty differs from food security. Food security was defined as physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food at all times to meet the population dietary and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Food security is more focused on the provision of food for all by whatever means necessary, whether by local production or global imports. As a result, economic policies concerned with food security typically emphasizes industrial farming that can produce more food cheaper. We don't need cheap food. We need nutritious food. And we don't need multinational corporations as they are doing right now. They control the food system. They control what foods we get, when we get the food, because for them, the bottom line is dollars. But in food sovereignty, the bottom line is health and nutrition and culturally appropriate and ecologically safe food. It's not about the dollar. So the idea of food security has gotten old. The new way of looking at food as communities who want to acknowledge the value of food and also to have a resilient environment, we need to look at food sovereignty so we could have food that is ecologically grown and also that is of just food for people and support small farmers other than big multinational corporations, because food is not a commodity. Food is the staff of life. Food is life itself. At the Nailini Forum for Food Sovereignty, the struggle for food sovereignty is a collective struggle and cannot be achieved by one single social group. Building and developing alliances at the local, regional, and international level is fundamental in order to build a movement working towards shared goals. All across the world, we come together to fight this struggle of food sovereignty. And it's a movement that is moving from strength to strength because it's David and Goliath, because the multinational corporations and some of the governments that support them, those are the Goliaths. But you know, people power always rule. It was this in mind that the Food Sovereignty Movement organized the International Nailini Forum for Food Sovereignty in 2007 in Silenge, Mali. The forum was organized in a horizontal participatory way with a steering group made up of peasant organizations and environmental NGOs. Welcome to the forum at the Nailini in Mali. The Declaration for Food Sovereignty, they came up with 6 pillars for food sovereignty. Very important. The idea was to, 1, focus on food for people. Put people's need for food at the center of policies insist that food is more than just a commodity. Food is the staff of life. Food is health. Food is not just the dollar bill, like what multinational corporations do. They make sure it's about making money. No, food is not about making money. Food is about health. Food is a human right. Number two, build knowledge and skills. Very important. Build on our traditional knowledge. Use research to support and pass this knowledge to future generations. Reject technologies that undermine or contaminate local foods. We're talking about genetically modified foods. Ones who don't know about GM food, they're saying GM food can be better for the earth, but it's like taking a genie out of a bottle and you cannot put a genie back in the bottle. They don't know. From creation, Almighty gave us seeds, soil, water, and rain. And that is the natural way that we need to grow our food. If we need pesticides, if we need herbicides, if we need any fertilizer, we could all be done as natural as possible. It doesn't need that chemical because the chemical runoff from farms are contaminating streams, rivers, and even the ocean. Practicing food sovereignty, you won't have that. So if we want to have a resilient and an earth that is healthy, an environment that is healthy, we need to practice food sovereignty. Working with nature, optimize the contribution of ecosystems, improve resilience. We want to make sure everything we do is the most natural and the most safest way that we could practice food sovereignty, practice farming. 4, value food providers. Support sustainable livelihood, respect the work of all food providers. COVID-19 really highlighted this at levels because in the last 3 years, we had to make sure we keep the supermarkets and the food stores open. They close off most of these other places. But food stores, supermarkets, drugstores, they had to be open. So value food providers, these are the people who keep us living. Know that food is the single most important thing to humankind. So we have to value the people who put the food on our table and respect them and value the food. Localize food systems, reduce distances between food providers and consumers, reject dumping and inappropriate food aid, resist dependency on remote and unaccountable corporations. Resist dumping inappropriate foods. Who have the goal to make the roads. That's why you see there's a lot of poverty and there's how much of millions of people are starving because we have a food system that is corrupt. We want to make sure we have a food system that really is appropriate for all people on earth. Put control locally. We don't need this distant food. We need food to be as local as possible. Okay? For generations and thousands of years before colonizations, that was the way people were able to grow enough food and survive. Place control in the hands of local food providers, recognize the need to inhabit and to share territories, reject privatization of natural resources. And the 7th principle, and this was a principle that came out of Canada, of Indigenous community in Canada. They contributed this to this is a new principle. It says, food is sacred. Recognize that food is a gift of life and not to be squandered. Assert that food cannot be commodified. It's not about buy and sell. It's about life. So we want to make sure that this principle is adhered to, because this is a gift of the Almighty gave to us that we could survive and sustain on this earth. So quickly, why Black food sovereignty? 12.4% of white children live in food insecure households, but a whopping 46.6% of Black children live in food insecure households in Canada, as I said before. What about the household with kids? Food insecurity doesn't just affect adults. While parents often skip meals so their kids can eat, children do experience food insecurity. Going to bed without a dinner or without a proper dinner, would have a youth waking up in the morning and he could be angry. God is a saying. What the saying is a hungry man is an angry man. And that goes for young people. That's why they say young Black kids misbehave in school. Well, if you don't feed them, if you don't create a system of equity and feed them, they might find a lot of angry youths because they're going to school without proper breakfast. Inequity in risk. Black households are 3.5 times more likely to be food insecure than white households. We could look at that and we could say, this is systemic racism because we live in the same country. Why are Black folks so much more food secure than white folks? And we have a lot of money, a lot of food programs, a lot of food organizations. They don't see this as a priority. They see food programs. But we have to prioritize indigenous food security and indigenous and Black food security. We're talking about indigenous food sovereignty and Black food sovereignty in Canada as the priorities of work to be done. So Black food sovereignty is the right of people of African descent to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agricultural system. So, I'll give you a step, because this idea and concept of Black food sovereignty was introduced through what I've just run over, the history of the African food basket, working from 1995 to present, and we really cultivated this. We give thanks for the Black community to give us the strength to continue being a resource and practicing what we call practicing Black food sovereignty. So here it goes. When we intentionally partner with the City of Toronto, confronting anti-Black racism unit, and start to roll out the concept and introduce it to the community officially. So in 2019, we had a conversation with the City of Toronto, confronting anti-Black racism unit, and we got some support from them to start community conversations with our community, looking at Black food insecurity and Black food sovereignty. We want to make sure to hear from folks what they think about Black food insecurity and the idea of Black food sovereignty as we introduce it to the community. So we had some speakers, people like Leslie Campbell, myself, and other folks was in conversation with our community. This is a conversation in the west end of the city at the Black Creek Community Health Center. And then we had another conversation in Scarborough at the Taibu Community Health Center with people like my good brother, Tinashe Kanengoni, and also my good sister, the wise sage, Jenna Scarrett. And we had good conversation with lots of folks turn up at the community centers. And we start to talk about the area of food insecurity in the Black community and the possible solution of Black food sovereignty. Well, you guys know what happened in February, March of 2020, COVID-19. So we have to make sure we stop with these community conversations and find different ways of engaging our community. And then when we start our virtual experience of engaging the community, we didn't stop. We continue the virtual conversation, but we also launched a new program called Black Food Toronto, that we really restarted the food basket, food buying club. But the only thing about this time around, we were giving away the food for free with resources from the federal government and some other from the City of Toronto and from the province. And we started distributing this food for free in our community. We're doing over 500 baskets a week for about a year and a half to 2 years. And we distributed over 1.5 million pounds of food in our community, especially to the most vulnerable, the seniors and single mothers. So here it is. Every week we support over 450 families. We need your help to increase our impact. We need your support. We even had a seniors basket in collaboration with a group called Supreme Foundations. We had many collaborations with many community groups, many churches, and many institutions to make sure this food reach our community within that 2020 to 2022, 2023, we still distributing this food in our community. So in the fall of November 27, we had our first Cultivating Black Food Sovereignty Conference, where we were able to have 2 days of conversation on Black food sovereignty. The purpose of the conference was to understand that the issue of Black food sovereignty in the light of COVID-19, the City of Toronto response to emergency food relief for Black communities. To generate a shared understanding of food sovereignty within and applicable to Black communities in Toronto, and strengthen stakeholder commitments to build the Toronto Black Food Sovereignty Alliance and achieve food sovereignty. And that work has continued from November 2020 to present. 2021, in partnership with the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, we continue this conversation with a Black Food Sovereignty Roundtable, engaging our brothers and sisters in the US, from Mississippi, from Cooperative Jackson, Sacagawea, Saki Hall, and Kali Akuno, to share the experience and their food sovereignty work with us in Toronto. Also, most importantly, we were able to network with the Indigenous community because we wanted to hear about the Indigenous food sovereignty experience. We invited one of the keynote speakers, the leader, Dawn Morrison of the Shipmek Ancestry, founder and curator of the working group on Indigenous food sovereignty. Good conversation. We're still in conversation presently. We're involved in an Indigenous and Black food sovereignty planning group. We were planning, sharing ideas of how we could strengthen each other as a people, as a sovereign people, to move forward the agenda of food sovereignty. In 2020, 2022, 2021, actually in 2021, the City of Toronto, after our conferences and our contribution, the city approved Canada's first Black food sovereignty plan, responding to the need for immediate and comprehensive action to address the problem of food insecurity experienced by many Black Torontonians. This was historic. This is historic in many ways. In the first city in North America, probably the first city in the world that has an intentional program looking at Black food sovereignty, where people of African descent defining their food sovereignty. So in June 2020, in response to the health impact of anti-Black racism, the Board of Health decided that anti-Black racism is a public health crisis. The Toronto Board of Health declared anti-Black racism a public health crisis. What they're really saying? They're saying racism against Black folks is a health crisis. A series of initiatives to address this challenge, including the development of a Black food sovereignty plan, were approved. So this plan has 3 interlocking goals: develop a city-supported Black-led initiatives dedicated to addressing food insecurity issues that disproportionately impact Black communities, identify and establish sustained support and funding for food-focused B3 organization and Black food sovereignty community infrastructure, and 3, engage, align, and leverage new and existing city strategies and initiatives to advance systems change and share goals to realize Black food sovereignty outcomes. Right now, we're looking for support from our community to make sure we really realize the Black food sovereignty plan 3 interlocking goals. Structural barriers like food apartheid and disconnected Black food networks. They have limited access to green space, research so that poor and racialized communities have less access to green space in the city of Toronto, including parks and tree canopy cover, and on the whole are more vulnerable to food security impacts related to extreme weather events. Uneven access to sustainable funding and resources. We give thanks that the city has prioritized funding for Black food organizations. We want to make sure that the grassroots and emerging, what they now call it, and listen to this carefully, this is a new term, folks have to get used to it. It's the 3B organizations: Black-led, Black-serving, and Black-mandated organizations are unconventional and experience lower funding and capacity and core infrastructure to sustain long-term services and programs. We want to make sure we get the resources to define our food systems. Lack of access to food system services in Black community, gaps in care, inequities in outcomes are a result of limited culturally appropriate nutrition food preparation and wellness programs. We're looking at making sure we can engage so we can have a sustainable food system in our community. Look at the barriers to access infrastructure. We've been asking for the last 3 years for a warehouse for the African food basket to make sure we could pack these baskets, and it's been a challenge. We're looking at seeing how we can overcome these barriers and systemic barriers for us to access resources necessary to cultivate Black food sovereignty. For building Black food sovereignty, culturally appropriate food and health systems, sustainable funding, growing space, Black hubs and cultural markets, accessible infrastructure, and I think the most important, African-centered food sovereignty, nutrition, food security, health promotion programs developed with an anti-Black racism and African-centered lens. When I speak about the African-centered lens, I'm speaking about people of African descent looking back at the way we live, pre-colonial Africa, African-centered. We have to always look to the roots. We have to always look to the foundation. That's why we say the Sankofa principle, we have to look back to move forward. So we have to make sure you are what you eat. And people of African descent are what we eat. People always talk about Usain Bolt, why he's running so fast. I think I may have the solution. Is that wonderful sweet potato and those yams, okay, and cocoa yam and callaloo from Jamaica. That may be the answer. You are what you eat. Those are African foods. This 5-year plan is a community-led, municipally supported initiative supported by an interdivisional team working towards achieving 3 primary objectives. Basically, what it's saying is the community is leading a municipally supported initiatives. And we have several interdivisional teams like Parks and Rec, like economic development, like public health, and all these different divisions in the city. We work with them to make sure we can realize the Black Food Sovereignty Plan. Develop city-supported Black-led initiatives dedicated to addressing food insecurities that disproportionately impact Black communities. Identify and establish sustained supports and funding for Black-led, Black sovereign, and Black mandated food organizations and Black food sovereignty community infrastructure. Engage, align, and leverage new and existing city strategies and initiatives to advance system change and share goals to realize Black food sovereignty outcomes in neighborhoods with high Black populations. These are the 3 main objectives of the Black Food Sovereignty Plan. We need community support, we need community help to realize this. We also need support from our allies, from whatever culture you are from. In 2022, I would like to say, if Black youths are not involved in anything you're doing, what you're doing is dead. So we had a Black Youth Food Sovereignty Forum put together by Toronto Metropolitan University, and my good brother who coordinates this, his name is Julian Hasford. He's a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. We got together with several groups, Youth Farming Collective, Village Academy, and the African Food Basket, and we make sure we had this forum, and we had over 80-something young people from Jamaica, from Ghana, from the US, from Canada. We had some folks from Guyana and Trinidad, and they made some countries that I can't say out of my head, but it was good conversation, and we hope to continue with this conversation. 2022, we again had our annual Black Food Sovereignty Conference. This is the first year of the Black Food Sovereignty Plan. There's a report from the city, and we continue with our conversation of organizing for Black food sovereignty. We are also now involved in Black food sovereignty in Quebec, mobilizing Black food sovereignty in Quebec. So, sorry, we've been waiting. We decided to clean our own house. And as the leader had said, our Honorable Marcus Garvey, we need to do what we need to do to define our food sovereignty. We need to be self-reliant. Thanks, Victor. One thing I must say as a closing thought, I want you guys to email me in whatever area of Canada you are at. We are mobilizing and we want to get in touch with you so we could move this agenda. the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal governments want to hear our conversation on Black food sovereignty. We need to centralize and organize. Let's do that. Let's work together so we could build this Black food sovereignty and know our Black food ways, and we could move from strength to strength. It's good to hear you, to be here with you guys. My brother, Victor, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks Setsi for keeping this journey of Black sovereignty going. And Victor, the work you're doing is Black sovereignty. We establishing these institutions to manage our own business, because we give governments a long time to do this, and we realize, you know what, they need help. Let's offer them the help, and let's do what needs to be done so that we could strengthen ourselves and strengthen our communities. Thank you so much. One love.
Merci papa, Elder. We give thanks. In the spirit of African excellence, we start on time and we'll end on time. We want to end this session the way we began, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge